The Dark Path: 5 Lives That Shaped Criminal History. On a crisp autumn morning in 1928, a young treasury agent stood in the marble halls of a New York courthouse, holding a leather ledger that would expose one of history's most elaborate criminal enterprises. As he waited to testify, he couldn't have known that the case before him was merely one thread in a vast tapestry of human darkness, a darkness that would, over the next century, reshape our understanding of crime, justice, and the human capacity for both brilliance and brutality. This is not merely a story of crimes committed or fortunes stolen. It is an exploration of genius turned to shadow, of ambition unbounded by morality, of minds so brilliant they could have transformed society, but instead chose to prey upon it. In the lives of these 5 extraordinary criminals, we find a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of human potential. They were not simple thugs or opportunistic thieves. Each was, in their own way, a virtuoso of vice, an architect of chaos who built criminal empires that would have been impressive business achievements had they not been stained with blood and corruption. Their stories read like fiction, the gentleman thief who inspired Sherlock Holmes' greatest nemesis, the architectural genius who built a literal house of horrors, the immigrant who gave his name to one of history's most enduring forms of fraud. What drives a brilliant mind to turn against society? How thin is the line between the business titan and the criminal mastermind? Between the visionary and the villain? These are not comfortable questions, but they are essential ones. For in understanding these 5 lives, we begin to understand not just the nature of crime, but the nature of power, ambition, and the seductive draw of living beyond society's boundaries. Their influence echoes through time, their methods studied by law enforcement and criminals alike. They changed how we build banks, how we secure museums, how we investigate murders, and how we track money. They forced society to evolve, to build stronger walls, to write new laws, to think differently about human nature itself. This is their story. It is a story of brilliance and madness, of ambition and destruction, of lives that left the world profoundly changed, though not perhaps in the ways they had imagined. Welcome to the Dark Path, the subtle empire of Carlo Gambino. Carlo Gambino's hands never shook. Not when he stepped off the oil freighter SS Vincenzo Florio as a teenage stowaway in 1921, his pockets empty save for a single letter of introduction. Not when he ordered the execution of Albert Anastasia, the feared Lord High Executioner of Murder, Inc., in a barber's chair at the Park Sheraton Hotel. And not decades later, when he sat in his modest Brooklyn home, calmly sipping espresso while FBI agents photographed his every move from their car across the street. "Look at the peacocks," he would tell his lieutenants, gesturing at the flamboyant gangsters who drew attention to themselves with diamond rings and Cadillacs. They strut today, they get cooked tomorrow. While others brandished Tommy guns and made headlines, Gambino built an empire with whispers. His power grew like a vine around the pillars of legitimate business, quiet but inexorable, until it was impossible to tell where commerce ended and crime began. The transformation of organized crime from street thuggery to corporate enterprise began in a small grocery store in Brooklyn. There, young Carlo learned American business practices by day while studying the ledgers of bootleggers by night. He discovered that violence was inefficient. Every dead body attracted police attention. Every gunshot damaged profitable relationships. Money flowed more freely through handshakes than through holsters. By 1957, when Gambino orchestrated the removal of Albert Anastasia, he had already built a shadow corporation that would have impressed Wall Street had its quarterly reports ever seen daylight. His innovation was bureaucracy. He created organizational charts, established clear chains of command, and implemented accounting practices that Fortune 500 companies would recognize. Murder became a business expense to be carefully weighed against profit margins. The FBI's frustration was palpable in their surveillance reports. "Subject appears to be reading newspaper," one agent wrote. "Subject continues to garden." They could only watch as Gambino conducted million-dollar transactions through subtle nods in social clubs and whispered conversations at family weddings. He turned his own heart condition into an asset, using it to avoid prison while building a criminal empire that would gross an estimated $500 million annually, roughly $4.5 billion in today's terms. In one telling moment, a young associate asked Gambino why he lived in such a modest house when he could afford a mansion. The Don gestured to the federal agents outside. "They expect a peacock," he said, "so I give them a sparrow." The young man would later become an informant. But by then, Gambino had already moved his most important operations elsewhere. The true scope of Gambino's influence emerged in fragments, like a photograph developing in darkroom chemicals. His family controlled the docks, but that was just the surface. Through a labyrinth of front companies and legitimate businesses, he had interests in everything from construction to garbage collection, from labor unions to Wall Street brokerages. Every major construction project in New York paid tribute, often without knowing whose pocket they were ultimately lining. When he died in 1976, his funeral was attended by over 2,000 mourners, including judges, police officers, and politicians. A final testament to his ability to blur the lines between lawful society and its shadow twin. The FBI agents who had watched him for decades finally entered his home, expecting to find elaborate records of criminal enterprise. Instead, they found meticulously maintained garden tools and a collection of Italian poetry. The true ledgers, like the real measure of his power, were never found. They existed in whispers, in handshakes, in the subtle nods between men in social clubs, a ghost empire that reshaped the relationship between crime and commerce in America forever. Carlo Gambino's greatest legacy wasn't just what he built, but how he built it, proving that in America, even crime could be corporatized, systematized, and made respectable, at least on the surface. His last words to his family were characteristically subtle. "Everything will be fine if you keep it quiet." It was both a final piece of advice and an epitaph for an era of organized crime that he had engineered, where power lay not in the thunder of gunfire, but in the whisper of influence. Would you like me to continue with the chapter on Pablo Escobar? The contrast between Gambino's subtle approach and Escobar's blazing path to power offers a fascinating study in criminal methodology. The rise and fall of Pablo Escobar. The first time Pablo Escobar saw a cocaine brick, he calculated its street value down to the dollar, multiplied it by thousands, and glimpsed his future. Standing in a dusty Medellin warehouse in 1976, the 27-year-old former car thief didn't see white powder. He saw an empire waiting to be built. By sunrise, he had already sketched out the logistics on a restaurant napkin. Small planes, remote airstrips, and a distribution network that would make United Parcel Service envious. Within a decade, that napkin would evolve into an operation moving 70 tons of cocaine per month, generating $420 million in weekly revenue. Escobar understood what Wall Street had long known: monopoly is the key to astronomical profits. He systematically eliminated or absorbed every competitor until his Medellin cartel controlled 80% of the global cocaine market. His infrastructure was staggering: 142 planes, 20 helicopters, 32 yachts, and a private army of 750 trained soldiers. Delta Airlines, by comparison, operated 163 aircraft at the time. But Pablo's true genius lay in his manipulation of public perception. While American newspapers dubbed him the King of Cocaine, locals called him Robin Hood of the poor. He built hospitals, schools, and housing developments. At soccer games, he would throw stacks of cash into the crowd. These weren't mere charitable acts, they were investments in loyalty. When police posted wanted posters, locals would tear them down before the paste dried. His headquarters, Hacienda Nápoles, embodied this duality. The sprawling estate featured a private zoo with hippos, giraffes, and elephants where local children could visit for free. Underground, A sophisticated communications center coordinated international drug shipments with military precision. Above ground, exotic animals roamed while submarines filled with cocaine slipped through Caribbean waters. The scale of his operation forced innovation. When traditional smuggling routes became compromised, Escobar hired unemployed engineers to design submarines capable of carrying 2 tons of cocaine. He established the first large-scale money laundering operation through Panama's banking system, a blueprint that criminal enterprises still follow. His accountants had to spend $2,500 monthly just on rubber bands to bundle cash. But power at this scale breeds its own nemesis. By 1989, Forbes magazine listed him as the 7th richest man in the world, with a known net worth of $25 billion. The spotlight proved toxic. DEA agents nicknamed him the Ghost for his ability to evade capture, but even phantoms cast shadows. When Colombian presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán promised to extradite drug lords to the United States, Escobar's response was swift and terrible. The ensuing war would reshape Colombia's national identity. His most audacious move came in 1991, negotiating his own imprisonment. La Cathedral, his custom-built luxury jail, featured a disco, a spa, and a soccer field. Guards were hired from his own security team. It wasn't incarceration, it was a fortified palace with a misleading name. When authorities finally moved to transfer him to a real prison, he simply walked out through the back door. The end came on a rooftop in Medellin in 1993. The phone call that betrayed his location lasted 178 seconds, long enough for surveillance teams to triangulate his position. The official report states he died in a shootout, but witnesses say he smiled before taking a single bullet through his ear. His trademark execution style turned against him. Pablo's death didn't end the cocaine trade, it industrialized it. Modern cartels studied his rise and fall like a business school case study. They learned to stay smaller, quieter, more distributed. They learned that empires attract enemies, that submarines are better than small planes, that banks are better weapons than bullets. In his final years, Pablo's son asked him what he'd do differently if he could start over. His answer revealed both the brilliance and blindness that defined his reign. "Everything the same," he said, "but quieter." He never understood that his business model depended on noise. The thunder of bombs, the roar of public adoration, the whispers of betrayal. In death, he achieved what life denied him: silence. Would you like me to continue with Charles Ponzi's chapter? His story reveals how financial manipulation can be as powerful as any cartel's arsenal. The man who sold empty dreams. The story of Charles Ponzi. On August 13, 1920, a mob gathered outside Hanover Street in Boston. Not with pitchforks and torches, but with checkbooks and cash. They weren't there to destroy a monster, they were there to feed one. Charles Ponzi leaned out his office window, flashed his trademark smile, and watched as police struggled to maintain order among the crowds of people desperate to give him their money. What makes this scene remarkable isn't the crowd's size, but its timing. The Boston Post had just published a devastating exposé questioning Ponzi's investment scheme. Yet there they stood, not to withdraw their money, but to invest more. Ponzi had achieved something rarer than mere wealth. He had sold a dream so compelling that people chose to believe in it, even when confronted with its impossibility. His scheme began with a postal reply coupon purchased in Spain for 1 cent. In America, that same coupon could be exchanged for a 6-cent stamp. The profit margin was small, but Ponzi saw beyond the pennies to a fundamental truth about human nature. People will believe any impossible promise if you first show them a small proof. He parlayed this insight into a financial empire, promising investors a 50% return in 45 days through international postal coupon arbitrage. The mathematical impossibility was stark. To cover his outstanding investments by 1920, Ponzi would have needed to purchase 160 million postal reply coupons. There were only 27,000 in circulation worldwide. Yet he still attracted investors. The power of his scheme lay not in its complexity, but in its simplicity. he promised to do what every legitimate bank claimed was impossible. His office on School Street became a theater of wealth. Clerks counted stacks of cash with gold rings on their fingers, suggesting they'd grown rich on the same investments they were selling. Ponzi himself maintained 16 checking accounts across 7 banks, each showing astronomical balances. Bank managers, seeing these deposits, became his unwitting salesmen, whispering to their wealthy clients about this financial wizard. The true genius of his operation lay in its psychological architecture. Early investors received their promised returns on schedule, paid with money from new investors. These early winners became his evangelists, their genuine prophets serving as living proof of his fictional trading system. He understood that testimony travels faster than suspicion. The numbers are dizzying. In just 7 months, he took in $15 million, $196 million in today's terms. A clerk who joined him with $30 rose to manage hundreds of thousands. A janitor invested his $50 life savings and brought Ponzi $3 million in new investments from his immigrant community. The scheme crossed class lines. Bank presidents invested alongside shoe shiners. But unlike his criminal contemporaries, Ponzi's greatest weapon was legitimate business practice. He incorporated a company, filed patents, maintained impeccable books showing the fraud, and even planned to acquire a bank. He wasn't selling crime. He was selling the American dream with a guaranteed return. The collapse, when it came, revealed the scheme's most insidious innovation. His victims included not just the investors who lost money, but those who had made money and reinvested it, their genuine profits becoming part of their ultimate losses. He had not just taken their money, he had taken their ability to trust their own financial judgment. In his final court appearance, Ponzi delivered a statement so compelling that journalists described hardened court reporters wiping away tears. He spoke not of postal coupons or interest rates, but of dreams. Immigrant dreams, American dreams, dreams of escaping poverty through ingenuity. The judge sentenced him anyway. His name became immortal, attached to every similar scheme that followed. Yet the true legacy of Charles Ponzi isn't the specific mechanics of his fraud, it's the blueprint he created for selling financial impossibilities. His methods revealed how trust could be manufactured, how success could be stage managed, and how hope could be monetized. He died penniless in a charity ward in Brazil in 1949. His last recorded words were both confession and prophecy. Even if they never got their money back, I gave them the best show they ever saw. Would you like to hear about H.H. Holmes next? His story takes us from financial manipulation to a different kind of architecture, one designed not to hide money, but to conceal much darker secrets. The Murder Castle, a laboratory of death. In 1893, Chicago's World's Fair drew millions with its gleaming white city, a wonderland of electric lights, architectural marvels, and technological promises. 3 miles away stood a different kind of wonder, a 3-story commercial building whose blueprint would have turned Kafka's stomach. To its visitors, it was the World's Fair Hotel. To its architect, H.H. Holmes, it was a laboratory of death. Henry Howard Holmes arrived in Chicago with a medical degree, a string of insurance frauds, and an architect's precision. While Daniel Burnham rushed to complete the White City, Holmes methodically designed his dark counterpart. The building's blueprints, discovered years later, revealed a mind that approached murder with an engineer's efficiency. The edifice was a maze of architectural anomalies. Staircases led to brick walls. Guest rooms had gas lines that could be controlled from a master panel in Holmes's office. Some doors could only be opened from the outside. The basement contained acid vats, quicklime pits, and a crematorium disguised as a glass-bending furnace. Holmes called them experiments. The police would later call them evidence disposal. His genius lay in making the abnormal seem routine. The hotel's ground floor housed legitimate businesses, a pharmacy, a jewelry store, a restaurant. Customers never questioned the odd chemical smells or late-night furnace operations. Holmes understood that commerce was the perfect camouflage for carnage. The World's Fair brought him an endless stream of victims, young women seeking jobs, tourists looking for lodging, businessmen hoping to strike deals. They checked in with dreams of the White City. They disappeared into his black one. Holmes kept meticulous records of his guests in leather-bound journals, noting their habits, relationships, and bank accounts. These weren't just murder records, they were research notes. His methods combined medical knowledge with theatrical flair. Some rooms were airtight chambers where he could study asphyxiation. Others had blowtorch-like devices mounted in the walls for thermal experiments. He installed body-sized chutes for convenient transport to the basement. Even the building's dimensions were calculated, each floor just high enough to prevent screams from reaching the street. But Holmes's true innovation was his use of legitimate business practices to facilitate murder. He took out life insurance policies on his employees, had them sign proxy forms for their estates, and filed missing persons reports himself to control the narrative. He didn't just kill, he monetized death with ruthless efficiency. The unraveling began with a horse trade gone wrong. Benjamin Petersall, Holmes's longtime associate, was found dead in Philadelphia, a staged suicide meant to collect insurance money. The scheme might have worked had Holmes not also murdered Petersall's 3 children, a detail that launched Detective Frank Geyer on an interstate manhunt. Geyer's investigation unveiled horrors that challenged the imagination. Below the hotel's foundation, police found a macabre assembly line. Dissection tables, preserved organs, and skeletal remains arranged with taxonomic precision. Holmes hadn't just built a murder house, he'd created a systematic study of death. In his jail cell, Holmes wrote a confession claiming 27 murders. The actual count may have exceeded 200, but numbers meant little to him. During his trial, he appeared more interested in discussing his building's architectural innovations than defending against murder charges. When asked about the gas chambers, he spoke like a proud inventor demonstrating a new patent. The Philadelphia courthouse that hosted his trial became a theater of the macabre. Ladies in fine dresses fanned themselves while Holmes, impeccably dressed, described his experiments with clinical detachment. He treated his trial as a lecture series, offering detailed explanations of his methods that left hardened detectives taking notes. They hanged him on May 7, 1896. His neck didn't break. It took him 20 minutes to die, during which time he never showed distress. Witnesses reported that his eyes remained open, observing his own death with scientific curiosity. Holmes's legacy isn't just in the body count or the gruesome methods. He created a template for how evil could hide in plain sight, wrapped in the respectability of commerce and science. His murder castle proved that the most effective monster isn't one that hides under the bed, it's the one that owns the building and collects the rent. Would you like to hear about our final subject, Adam Worth? His story takes us from the brutality of Holmes to the artistry of crime, a tale of a master thief who inspired fiction's greatest villain, the mastermind behind the art of crime. In 1876, Thomas Gainsborough's portrait of Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire, vanished from a London gallery. The painting, worth £25,000, roughly $3.5 million today, didn't just disappear. It evaporated, leaving Scotland Yard grasping at shadows. 25 years later, when the canvas finally resurfaced, the art world learned what London's underworld had long known. They'd witnessed the signature performance of Adam Worth, the thief who inspired Sherlock Holmes' nemesis, Professor Moriarty. Worth began as a Union Army deserter who faked his death at the Second Battle of Bull Run. He understood early that identity was fluid. By age 20, he had mastered the art of being simultaneously dead in Virginia, alive in New York, and about to arrive in London. Standing 5 feet 5 inches tall, Worth commanded respect through intellect rather than intimidation. He dressed like a banker, spoke like a professor, and moved through high society with the ease of someone born to it. His genius lay not in picking locks, but in making crime unnecessary. He would spend months becoming a trusted figure in a bank, only to walk out with the contents of its vault in broad daylight, invited by the manager himself. His criminal enterprise operated like a shadow government. He maintained offices in major cities, employed a permanent staff of forgers and safecrackers, and developed a private intelligence network that rivaled Scotland Yard's. But unlike his contemporaries, Worth forbade violence. "Blood," he explained to his associates, "leaves stains that money can't wash away." The Duchess heist exemplified his methodology. Rather than break into the gallery, he cultivated a friendship with its owner over months. On the night of the theft, he attended a gallery event as an honored guest. The painting didn't go missing so much as it quietly excused itself from the premises. When police interviewed witnesses, they described seeing Worth admiring the painting. None mentioned seeing him leave with it. His operation spanned continents. In Paris, he sold diamonds that disappeared from Amsterdam. In New York, he fenced bonds stolen from London. He maintained luxury apartments in every major city, each under a different alias, each providing perfect alibis. Hotel registers would show him sleeping in Vienna while he orchestrated heists in Berlin. The Belgian diamond caper of 1882 demonstrated his strategic brilliance. Rather than steal the gems, Worth invested in the diamond company, became a trusted board member, and simply adjusted the security protocols to enable the theft. The diamonds vanished during a routine inspection, one that Worth himself had suggested. But his masterpiece was the manipulation of his own legend. He planted stories in newspapers suggesting that famous unsolved crimes were the work of a master criminal society. The truth was simpler and more elegant. Most of these crimes were Worth working alone, using reputation as a smokescreen for simplicity. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creating Professor Moriarty, borrowed heavily from Worth's methodology. Like Worth, Moriarty was a mathematician who approached crime as an intellectual exercise. Both maintained legitimate businesses as covers and operated vast criminal networks while keeping their own hands seemingly clean. Worth's downfall came not from police work, but from his own sense of honor. When a former associate was wrongly imprisoned for one of Worth's crimes, he orchestrated his own capture to provide testimony for the man's release. In custody, he negotiated like a head of state, securing favorable terms that protected his associates while maintaining his reputation. The return of the Duchess portrait in 1901 was his final masterstroke. Rather than sell it for profit, he arranged its return through the Pinkerton Detective Agency. William Pinkerton himself handled the negotiations, later remarking that Worth was the most remarkable criminal ever known. Worth died in 1902, leaving an estate that puzzled investigators. His legitimate holdings, properties, businesses, investments were substantial. But his true legacy was intangible. He had transformed crime from a brutal trade into an intellectual art form. In doing so, he created a template for the modern white-collar criminal. The only photograph known to exist of Worth shows him in a banker's suit, sporting a neatly trimmed beard, looking more like a university dean than a master thief. It's exactly the image he cultivated, the respectable facade that allowed him to commit audacious crimes in plain sight. That photograph, fittingly, was later proven to be of someone else entirely. Would you like me to write the epilogue? It ties together these 5 remarkable stories and examines their lasting impact on criminal enterprise and law enforcement. Echoes of Crime, a modern reflection. A cryptocurrency exchange collapses in 2022, vaporizing billions in client funds. A cartel's drone fleet outmaneuvers Border Patrol surveillance. A hacker drains a bank account without ever touching a keyboard. In each headline, we hear echoes of our 5 pioneers of crime, their innovations reverberating through time, transformed but recognizable. Gambino's corporate structure lives on in modern cybercrime syndicates, where administrators manage networks of ransomware affiliates with the same bureaucratic precision he once applied to waste management contracts. Their organizational charts could hang in any Fortune 500 office, if you ignore the product line. Escobar's logistics network seems quaint compared to today's dark web marketplaces, yet his fundamental insight endures. Control the distribution, control the industry. Modern cartels operate like tech startups, using data analytics to optimize routes and machine learning to predict law enforcement patterns. The submarines he pioneered have evolved into semi-autonomous vessels that can cross oceans without human crews. Ponzi's basic formula, using trust as leverage, underpins today's cryptocurrency scams and digital Ponzi schemes. The numbers are bigger, the technology more complex, but the core psychology remains unchanged. Modern fraudsters still understand his essential insight: show people a small truth to sell them a big lie. Holmes' Murder Castle, with its labyrinth of hidden rooms and secret passages, finds its digital equivalent in the architecture of modern malware, programs designed to hide their true nature beneath layers of legitimate-seeming code. Today's predators don't build hotels. They construct virtual spaces where the unwary disappear just as completely. Worth's methodology, using respectability as camouflage, has become the standard playbook for corporate crime. Modern financial criminals don't wear masks. They wear bespoke suits and give TED Talks. His technique of hiding in plain sight has evolved into a fine art, practiced in boardrooms rather than back alleys. Law enforcement has evolved in response. The FBI's cyber division employs mathematicians who would have appreciated Worth's elegant solutions. DEA algorithms track supply chain patterns that would have impressed Escobar. Forensic accountants dissect financial schemes with tools Ponzi never imagined. Yet for every innovation in crime prevention, there's a countermeasure. Modern criminals study their predecessors not for their methods, but for their mistakes. They've learned to stay smaller, move faster, adapt quicker. The lone wolf has replaced the kingpin. The network has supplanted the hierarchy. Perhaps the most profound legacy of these 5 pioneers is how they transformed crime from a contest of force into a battle of intellects. Today's most dangerous criminals don't threaten violence, they threaten disruption. They don't steal things, they steal information. They don't break walls, they break trust. As artificial intelligence and quantum computing emerge, we stand on the brink of another criminal renaissance. The tools are different, but the ambitions remain the same. Somewhere, right now, someone is looking at a new technology and seeing what our 5 pioneers saw, not what it was designed to do, but what it could be made to do. The game continues, but the stakes have grown. We no longer fear a single murder castle, but worry about entire virtual worlds designed for predation. We don't track missing postal coupons, but monitor digital currencies that can vanish in microseconds. We don't guard against safecrackers, but defend against quantum computers that could break the encryption protecting global finance. Yet perhaps there's hope in this evolution. Each of our 5 subjects was ultimately undone, not by force, but by their own innovations. The very systems they built eventually exposed their vulnerabilities. As crime becomes more sophisticated, it also becomes more fragile, more dependent on complex systems that can fail in complex ways. In the end, these 5 men created more than criminal enterprises. They created templates that would shape the evolution of both crime and justice. Their stories remind us that the most dangerous innovations often come not from new weapons or tools, but from new ways of thinking about old problems. The future of crime may be digital, but its architects still study the old masters. In their successes and failures, they seek inspiration for the next great innovation in the dark arts. And in understanding their methods, we might just glimpse how to stop their modern disciples. After all, the best way to catch a thief has always been to think like one.